how then would you link that to your story? And see, I would say Todd, years ago, when he was, certainly when he was not a Christian, but even as a young Christian, his scorecard, his way of measuring fruitfulness was not multiplication. It was not producing fruit on other people's trees. Talk a bit about your journey, how God took you from where, and my guess is that's probably where most Christians are, where you were. How did God take you on that journey?
Yeah, I want to be really clear getting into the story that we don't have to be in full-time vocational ministry to live the life I'm getting to live, if I can say it that way. Yeah. It would be really easy. Last week, when you got to celebrate the story of residents going off to plant churches, it might be easy for you to say, well, that's somebody in full-time ministry, that's not me. And I think back 25 years ago, and I think that's me, is okay, that there's full-time vocational ministry folks, and then there's everybody else. The reality is, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, but it begins with that vision of, okay, my life is not about the scorecard for time. It's about a scorecard for kingdom.
Right.
And even though you'll talk about Bob Buford, most of us don't have millions of dollars to invest the way that he has to have his impact, but the calling, the vision is the same. That's the point.
Yeah, and I think for my story to make sense, we have to start with the calling story. Like, how did it end up that the journey of getting to where I am right now? So I'm one of the weird people that knew when I was 13 years old what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be a nuclear engineer. And as weird as that sounds, everything was in the way at that point. College was in the way. I wanted to get through college and get out and be a nuclear engineer. I had the blessing of being hired at one of the top engineering groups in the world called Naval Reactors that operates all of our nuclear things in the Navy. I loved what I was doing. I didn't want to move on from it, and promoted too quickly, and found myself in my 30s wrestling with, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Like,
you did love what you're doing. I'm sorry, I'm laughing. I remember there was some movie or something being produced on PBS that was like about the nuclear Navy or about the nuclear submarines, and they came to this door on the nuclear submarine that said top secret, and you and Troy were kind of like, that's what I get to do. The stuff that's behind that door. Anyway, You loved what you were doing.
And the key is, I loved what I was doing. I didn't want to move beyond what I was doing at the time, but I also started wrestling with this idea of from success to significance. Is this really what I'm going to measure fruitfulness with? I mean, at the time, I wouldn't have used the word fruitfulness, but that's really was at the core of it. What is fruitfulness going to be for me for the next 35 years? Right when I started wrestling with it, a guy named Bob Buford wrote a book called Halftime. Bob owned one of the largest cable companies in America early on in Cablevision, strong Christian guy, and Bob decided in his halftime, when he was in his early 40s, that he was going to spend the rest of his life giving his money away, such that the last check would bounce. And it was actually the subtitle of his book that captivated me, which was Moving from Success to Significance. And so I start going through the book the year it came out, when I was wrestling with it. I didn't have his money, but he was speaking a language for me that was tapping into this fruitfulness thing. So I started on the journey of what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I wrestled for a couple years and concluded that I was going to leave the Navy and start a company. And I won't go into all the details of what happened there. The admiral I was working for called me back to DC quickly and said, I need you to work on this project. That kind of sidetracked my plans to go do the company on the timeline it was in. And so when I came back to DC, Brett starts talking about, why don't you go into ministry? Why don't you go into ministry? Which for me was a very, no, I want to go start a company. Why would I want to go into ministry? I don't have a Bible college background, all the different things. So for about 2 years, I was wrestling with, what am I really going to do with things? And here's where the fruitfulness and scorecard really starts to play in. I call it the 2-column exercise. I took out a piece of paper, 2 columns. One side of the column was life as it is, a wonderful 401k, plenty of money, all the good things, vacations, cars, the different things, kids in private school. And on the other column was, what if I did this crazy thing Brett's talking about, a ministry sort of thing? And I'm going to tell you the definition of insanity. I did the 2-column exercise. I'm not kidding you. I did it 50 times over 2 years, and it always produced the same result. One side didn't seem to add up to the other. And so at the time, I've told Brett, this is where the weird paradox comes in. What God really was wanting was a step of faith. He was wanting a step of faith. Not really, I don't think, even as much for the things being surrendered on the left column as it was a new definition of fruitfulness. It's what does fruitfulness really look like? What are the things that are really going to last?
Todd, as you're saying that here, the point I want to draw out here at this point is, the question is, are you teachable? Are you at a point right now where you're willing to listen to God on a new scorecard? There's a crisis of faith. There's a crisis of disbelief that you have to go through. For Bob Buford, it was the death of a son. He sold a company, realized he'd been living for success. His son died. It's like, okay, God, something more has to matter in my life. For you, it's this transition that you're going through, and what am I supposed to do? And and God will use me to ask you the questions that were bugging you. I hope this morning for some of you creates that. My guess is that God has set you up for this conversation. So you're hearing Todd and thinking, oh man, this is exactly what I've been wrestling with. So there has to be that crisis where you are open to significant change. Okay, so then what happened next for you to process your next steps?
Yeah, it's profoundly hard and it's not complicated. I mean, it really is a surrender of a step of faith for me at that point. It is when Anna and I took the step, candidly, it was a harder impact on her than it was on me. It was that putting to death the left side of the scorecard had the most direct impact to her. In our case, and I'm not proposing this to anybody, in our case, we believed that within a couple of years, we may be in bankruptcy. We may dry the 401k out. We took a huge pay cut to do what we were doing to go there. But again, I don't think the issue is about the money or the stuff. I think the issue is God wanting the new scorecard.
Now, let's go back to let's bridge the gap then with people who are, most people are not going to make the transition from the nuclear Navy into full-time Christian ministry, into full-time church ministry. But part of the reason I wanted you to have this conversation today is because I don't know anybody who has a clear vision for one of the great lost resources of the church is a whole bunch of people that have great giftedness, and you think, if I can't teach kids Sunday school or bring or make coffee, then God is not going to have much impact on my life. And so I want you to draw that connection from where people are right now to understanding, what they do, they can live right now in a way that produces fruit on other people's trees.
Yeah, I think what Brett's talking about right now, the idea, if I go back to disciples who make disciples that plant churches, the reality is, if all we do is plant churches, if we just plant a bunch of churches, we are still not going to see necessarily what we would call gospel saturation, seeing the penetration of the gospel being carried into every crack and cranny of society. If we're to carry the gospel into every crack and cranny of society, at this point in culture, it's not going to come by bringing everybody to this church building or the church buildings. It's going to come by how each of you see yourselves as an everyday missionary where you work, live, and play. What's it look like to think differently and be intentional in that kind of setting? What's it look like for you to see yourself? I'll ask it this way. What keeps you at your gym from just declaring yourself the chaplain of the gym? It sounds crazy, but Professional teams have chaplains and have things. What kind of qualification do you have to declare yourself and carry a card that you're the chaplain of the gym? Think about how it changes. Think the mindset. All of a sudden, I'm going to be the chaplain at the gym. When I went through this exercise years ago, Brett, of what would it look like for me to be the chaplain at the gym, here's the reality before I thought intentionally that way. I would go to the gym when the least number of people were there because I wanted to efficiently get in and out. Success was getting in and out talking to the fewest number of people. But if I'm going to be the chaplain of the gym, I have to think differently. Maybe it's going when it's a little more crowded and being okay waiting in line for a machine. This is going to sound crazy, but you can get the picture. The sauna at the gym becomes like the old-fashioned synagogue. When you're in the sauna and there's a group of 6 people sitting around talking about things, you engage the 6 people in the sauna differently if your intentionality is, I am a missionary in this place and I'm the chaplain of this place. Because those 6 people in the sauna are going to be talking about life's problems and challenges and the thing with their kid. And it's a way of how do I intentionally engage differently.
Talk about what that means, though, in terms of prayer walking for you, because I don't want to go to the sauna in the first place, but I don't want to go in the sauna and have those conversations unless I know God's gone before me. But you talk about prayer walking.
Yeah. So when we moved from Northern Virginia down to North Carolina, where my wife and I met, I just felt a real sense. And as I tell this story, it doesn't matter whether I'm in full-time vocational ministry or not, this story. I'd be doing this if I was still an engineer full-time. I felt a conviction that the Duke University campus was part of my mission field. I just felt like, what does it, and I went in with the intentionality.
As an NC State grad, you knew they were lost.
As an NC State grad. Okay?
That's right.
And so I just went in with the idea of, if Duke University is my mission field and I'm a missionary, what am I going to do? And it started out very simple. I'm going to prayer walk, meaning walk around the campus. So every Sunday afternoon after church, I would go to Duke University and for an hour or two walk around the campus. And I would pray. And the prayer was really simple past every place I would go. God, put the right people in my path. Put the right people in my path. And we're not here to talk about it today. This is 2 years ago that started, 2.5 years ago. I could write a book on how God has answered that prayer. And I can link it to our church planting activities at New Life in a really big way. Like the stories that fall out of how God has put, let me just start by the very first person that turns out the head of the divinity school lives in my neighborhood, and we run into each other, and he starts making connections for me to other people at Duke. And so the web or network of connections that I've been able to make there, and I just continue to see myself as a missionary with that mission field to engage it.
The principle here is intentionality. The application is, what are you doing in the sauna? Another application is just prayer walking. Wherever you go, walk in, saying, God, where's the opportunity? Who put somebody in my life for me to have a conversation? The result of this is Todd, the NC State grad, is doing VIP tours now of Duke University.
So just imagine for a second that you've decided, it sounds crazy, but this is real life. I mean, it's intentionality. I want to be a missionary at Duke, and I am praying, God, put the right people in my path. Who is one of the very first people that I run into? An 85-year-old head tour guide at Duke University who has the key to Cameron Indoor Stadium, who does all the VIP tours. This guy played on the basketball team in 1957, was the captain of the baseball team. I mean, he knows everybody at Duke. There's not a person at Duke University from the president down that he doesn't know. And we run into each other, we get talking, and before you know it, he asks, do you want to be a tour guide at Duke? Well, think about it for a second. If your mission field is Duke University and you want to be a missionary there, it doesn't get much better than being a tour guide carrying a key to Cameron Indoor Stadium. Okay, and so all that falls out of just the intentionality of prayer walking and praying God put the right people on my path. And I'd be doing that if I was in the marketplace full time. That's not a vocational full-time thing.
Now let's backtrack that a little bit more. So if intentionality is significant action, well, intentionality to what end? So how do you measure what you're going to be intentional? How do you determine what you're going to be intentional about? It has to do with scorecard.
Right.
Are you counting runs? Or are you counting points?
And I would put the score I'm just going to say for me right now, I put the scorecard part into two pieces. One is a posture. What posture am I going to take? Am I going to try to do something to my own end? I have chosen, and I think it's consistent with the posture of New Life Christian Church and our fruit grows with other people's tree. If I can just use the word, how can I help you? It's the posture of how can I help you? And I'm going to quickly say, let's go back to Bob Buford. When Bob Buford died, the pastor of his church doing the eulogy at his church said, let me give you a bottom line of Bob Buford and tell you one story that captures his life. He said, Bob attended our church, and he called me one day and asked if he could meet with me early on. He said, I didn't know him well, and the pastor of the church said, usually when someone in the church wants to meet with me and asks for a meeting, there's a marriage problem, there's a kid problem, there's a money problem, there's some kind of problem when they're wanting to meet with me. And he said, Bob walked into my office, came across the room, shook my hand, we sat down, and I thought he was going to unload a problem on me. And Bob looked at me and said, how can I help you? And he said, in 30 years of pastoral ministry, no one has ever come to me and asked that question. And so that posture of how can I help you? And if we go back to the prayer walking and God put the right people in my path, a lot of times it's our agenda when we're trying to find something. But if we can have the agenda of God, make it clear, maybe there is something for me in this, but intersect the need of somebody else with where I'm at. I'm calling that the posture part of it. Now here's where the unique part that each of us can have different fruitfulness. In my life right now, almost everything I do intentionally is through the lens of seeing 16% of churches in the United States reproduce. I would love to see us make a dent in that before I die and see the needle moving. So I also go into every interaction, every prayer walk, everything I'm doing, I'm thinking the fruitfulness of disciples who make disciples, who plant churches that plant churches. It's the lens I see the opportunity of the world through. And as the opportunities come to me, I can say no to some things because I don't see the disciple making and church planting opportunity in it. And I'm not prescribing that on everybody else. I'm saying that's why it's important we have an understanding of how we're defining fruitfulness. I'd say it this way, push aside kingdom thing. If you decided fruitfulness, I want to be worth $20 million by the time I die. That's my fruitfulness. I want to conquer the $20 million hill. How's the rest of your life going to align? If that's the fruitfulness definition, all of your activities and the things you do, what you say yes to and what you say no to, is to produce that fruitfulness. So the idea of the scorecard, Brett, what we set our eyes on for fruitfulness becomes our yes-no filter to what we do, how we spend our time. And if we go back to success to significance, all we have to give is our time, our talent, and our treasure. Where do we put our time? Where do we put our talent? Where do we put our money?
So, and understand, here, get this picture. Imagine everybody at New Life is living with this daily intentionality for, Lord, make me as fruitful as my one life can be for eternity. And you're living it out every day. Lord, I am the pastor to my community. God, show me who I can help. Show me who I can serve. Show me how you want to use me. And make me fruitful in that.